Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Co-op. We are pleased that you are listening to us this morning. We're pleased that we're up and about, and we have Mr. Bruce Mayer, partner of Wegner CPA. Good morning, Bruce.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. Glad you took out time today to be with us. You are a CPA. What is? I think of CPAs as guys with these little these little visors on their head, and they sit around with pencil and paper dealing with numbers. Is that what you do all day?
I don't have a visor, but I do largely deal with numbers all day and helping to solve people's problems, help them file their tax returns and stay in compliance with various kinds of rules.
Okay. How did you decide to do this kind of work?
Well, I actually got started in accounting through co-ops, which is kind of interesting and I think relevant. I was working as a part-time staff person at a small food co-op in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I still am, the Mifflin Street Community Cooperative. And our bookkeeper left, and we were having trouble finding somebody who had the right experience and would fit in with our collective decision-making model. And so I volunteered to be the bookkeeper, and there was somebody who could train me in the basics. And then they made it a condition of moving me to that position that I take 2 semesters of accounting, and I fell in love with it. And ended up going back to school and getting my MBA in accounting. So,
wow. I've heard of people say, I learned a lot in the co-op and I applied that to my personal, budgeting and savings and working together. And so I've heard that, but I've never heard anybody say, I started working in the co-op in this field, and then that became my career. That's neat.
Yes, I have actually an undergraduate degree in botany and had a lot of math and so forth, but no business experience whatsoever. So it sort of opened my eyes to take the accounting classes and learn about that aspect of business, and I really loved it, and I realized that I was better at helping people solve those sorts of problems than I'm not such a people person that I'm good at group dynamics and making board meetings better and things like that, but I can help people solve accounting tax related problems.
Yeah, we have a similar background in that I have a bachelor's and master's in math, and so I had a friend of mine when I was teaching math. He asked me to do his accounting, if you will, keep the books. I didn't like it. So that was, I thought I might even go into it. And I had one interview after my MBA, and I just said, no, I don't think that, because I like the people side and I like being out with people. And I couldn't see myself in this little desk with the visor on dealing with the numbers all day long. But you got your...
Yes, and success in accounting does require, dealing with people and helping them, understanding their problem and helping them solve it. But you do also spend a lot of time by yourself, manipulating numbers and reading, tax code and things like that. And that's certainly not for everybody.
True. So how old were you when you were at the food co-op in Madison?
I was in my mid-20s. I had gotten that undergraduate degree and then decided not to go to graduate school and was basically hanging out and had started volunteering at the food co-op and then got the part-time job there. So I was in my mid-20s. So I started in public accounting when I was 29, which is a little later than most people do.
Well, you found your love. You found your passion in co-ops. That's fine by working with and through co-ops. So wonderful. So you are a certified public accountant. And what is that for people out there that may not know what you all do and how you become a CPA?
Sure. Yeah, a CPA is a license that's generally regulated by your state, and so you need to have passed the CPA exam, which is a pretty comprehensive. If you put it all together into one test, it would take a day and a half. And in order to be qualified to sit for that exam, you have to have basically 5 years of college now, essentially the equivalent of an MBA, in order to be able to get that. And so once you have it, you are able to be part of a CPA firm or go off on your own, and you're able to sign tax returns, which the IRS regulates who is allowed to be a paid preparer on a tax return, and then also that you can issue audits and reviews of financial statements. So on a day-to-day basis, what CPAs are doing is working with individuals and businesses to look at the financial reports that they have, and then generally accomplishing a goal like getting a tax return done, or if they have a requirement to have an audit or a review of their financial statements, getting that done so that it can be given to a bank or a regulator or whatever. And then in other cases, CPAs are helping look at a business and help analyze how things are going. Are expenses too high? Is there some way to improve the margin? Things like that. So there's a wide range of things that people do, even beyond what I just mentioned, but that's generally what CPAs are doing.
So you mentioned a couple times an audit versus a review. What is that?
Sure. And the word audit always scares everybody. When I say that I do audits, they immediately think that I work for the IRS, which we don't. Okay. We're helping protect you from the IRS, hopefully. But an audit or a review is looking at the financial statements of a business, which are the balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows, and some footnotes that describe the financial results of that business. And the CPA comes in and examines those. So an audit is a higher level where we're looking at underlying details, and then a review is a lesser level of scrutiny, but still taking a look at the financial statements to see if there's any potential errors or misstatements in those. And then we put our report on it, saying either in a review that we're not aware that there are any problems in the numbers, or in an audit, actually giving an opinion that it's a fair presentation of the financial information. So it's a fairly specialized thing, but many organizations, many nonprofits are required to have those to meet state regulations if they're above a certain size. And oftentimes larger co-ops need those either to assure their members that things are being done done correctly, or that they have outside loans, that they have lenders that want to see a review or an audit, or if they're issuing securities, like if they have preferred shares, and sometimes even member loan programs, the state that they're residing in may require them to have an audit of their financial statements. So it's basically helping people stay in compliance with regulations, and then assuring the lender or the members that the financial information is accurate.
So, being a property manager, and that's where I learned about co-ops, I find audits are very, very helpful to make sure that my clients, the co-op or condo, they know that we are doing things, that somebody's looking over our shoulders to make sure we're doing things properly. So that's why I like audits also.
Oh, absolutely. And I've found that in cooperatives, when it's a small group, say a worker co-op of 6 people, they don't really need that, because everybody can take a look at the numbers and feel comfortable that they have a personal feel for it. But if you get a worker co-op with 100, 200 or more people, obviously many of those people are not at all involved in the financial information. But their livelihood depends on this business, and the patronage dividends they're allocated and so forth are dependent on the numbers being fair and accurate. And so having an auditor review when a co-op gets larger can help give everybody confidence that things are being done correctly. They're not being taken advantage of.
So I had not thought about this so clearly. You mentioned patronage dividends, but for people out there in the audience, that a patronage dividend is like your bonus at the end of the year, or it is, if there's profit, how much the co-op decides that they are going to give to the members, how much, and the members make that decision. And that if you have $100 in profit, how much of it stays in the business for growth, how much of it goes to social responsibilities out in the community, and how much goes back to the members. So the members help make that decision, but those numbers have to be correct to make sure that none of it is leaking out anywhere, so that people can get their deserved dividends or bonus at the end of the year. Did that summary kind of correct?
Oh, yes. And it follows, one of the co-op principles that profits should be allocated based on the work that somebody does or the business that a member does with the co-op, that you're doing your allocations proportional to that as opposed to proportional to ownership, which is the traditional model for a business. So certainly, everybody wants to make sure that they understand how that formula works and that they all agree in advance that it's a fair way to allocate things, and then that it's accurately executed.
So you come in with that is actual, that everything is accurate. And that principle, by the way, is the third principle, member economic participation. So there's normally some buy-in. Food co-ops, I've heard, is $100, maybe $10 a month or something. They put very, very low buy-in, and it could be $1,000, $2,000, $10,000, but a lot of times it can be very low. And when there is a surplus, when and if there's a surplus or profit, then that allocation can be had. And that's great that somebody's come around and make sure the numbers are accurate. Okay. And there's a total of 7 principles. We may get through those before we finish here today. So that's what a CPA does, and that's why it's so important to everybody in the organization and to government officials sometimes, IRS, if there's a loan out there anywhere or if there's preferred stock, it's kind of like it's a liability to somebody, then they want to make sure that the numbers are accurate and, again, that no money is getting lost and running out the door in any kind of way. Let's see, there was something else that you mentioned. I don't have it here, but I'll come back to it. Oh, balance sheet. I have found, Bruce, that the balance sheet is more important than the income statement, and most people think of the income statement of the income and expenses as the most important thing. What do you think about that statement?
Sure, and that's one that professional accountants think about a lot because the income statement is intuitive to most people. You understand that money is coming in, for the revenue of the business, and then that money is going back out again to pay.
Okay, I need you to. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I need you to stop there, and we'll come back on this, the difference between a balance sheet and income statement after our first break. We'll be right back. Information is power. It really is power. But it's stored power. You only get the power, the use of the power, when you get into action. You have to strike that match, and that match is action to get the power in everyday life. It's doing something. So the National Co-op Bank is sponsoring this program to give you information about cooperatives, so that you may go and start one yourself or get it for a group of people, 3, 4, 5 people, and start a co-op to solve some community problem, or go find a co-op, whether that's a food co-op, housing co-op. Now, you might be like Bruce Mayer, who's our guest today, who went and volunteered at a food co-op, and he got his career. Maybe I started to say you got your life, Bruce, but you got your career out of volunteering at a food co-op. And before we took break, Bruce, we were talking about the difference between balance sheet and income statement, and you were saying that income statement, the money that's coming in and the money that's going out, is intuitive. Let's go from there.
Sure. But then the balance sheet of an organization is not so intuitive, because it sums up the total of the assets, which is cash and money owed to the business and buildings and equipment and things like that, and then subtracts the liabilities, which is what you owe on those things, loans or day-to-day payments that need to be made for things like utilities and telephone. And then the remainder there is the equity or investment that the members have in the co-op. And so it is very important, because it tells you about how much debt that the co-op has, and that, whether there's lots of... it must be a bad line here, I'm not sure. But it tells people about how much money they owe to outside parties, and how much of their money is tied up in things like equipment and building.
Okay. So what I've got is a very simple, I say assets and your liabilities must equal. That's what the balance is all about. And assets are what you own, and that, yes, you own some cash and you own some buildings and some equipment. And liabilities are what you owe, and that's owed to other people in terms of notes or loans or mortgages, and then what you owe the shareholders in terms of equity. And that's the only way I've been able to explain it, to where I can get most people to understand that own and owe. And they kind of sort of get that, as opposed to assets and liabilities. But that's why it's so important.
Yes, and that the assets are what the business controls, that you can put number amounts on, and then those assets could get divided out in what you owe to other folks and what you own by the members.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's your background, your life story, and what you are doing, at least not your life story as it relates to your career. But how did you end up in Wegner?
Sure. Well, after I had graduated with my MBA, my interest in co-ops is more with things like food co-ops, housing co-ops, and I guess what are considered more alternative co-ops. And the only opportunities to work with a co-op-related firm in the Madison area was one that worked with large agricultural co-ops and so forth, and that just didn't personally interest me. Mm-hmm. So I started working at Wegner CPAs because they did a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, and also just a little bit with co-ops. And so, I'm also interested in social change and making the world a better place. And so thought that using my accounting skills to work with nonprofits would be a good thing. And public accounting, it takes a long time to get good, even though you have a degree and an advanced degree. It still takes you at least 3 to 5 years of working to be able to really help people. And so after that 3 to 5 years, I still had contacts in the co-op world, and sort of bit by bit started working with more and more co-ops. Initially, everybody in Madison, and then later on with co-ops outside of Wisconsin.
So I think if I had the wisdom that you just talked about, is that you wanted to use your CPA to help social change, to help make the world a better place. I think if I had that view, I might have gone into accounting. But my view of accounting and what was laid out to me in those first 3 to 5 years was just in the room taking the numbers. And as I've worked with accountants and CPAs and auditors, I can get a sense that some are more on that lean towards social change, social responsibility than others. Some are just numbers. Some are more people-oriented. So you may be more people-oriented than you think you are, or what you just first said.
Okay. Sure. Well, and I love working with co-ops. One of the things that didn't occur to me when I first started, were things like the purchasing co-ops that I work with, where businesses get together to help improve their buying power, and so it allows things like independent pharmacies to still exist. If independent pharmacies didn't have buying co-ops to get together and get better prices on their drugs and other products, Walgreens and Walmart and so on would have put them all out of business years ago, which would be a shame.
Mm-hmm. So we've mentioned several different types of co-ops. So let me give the audience overall, there's 4 basic types. There's all kinds of types, but there's 4 basic. And the first one, it depends on who owns and controls the business. And if the employees own and control the business, it's called a worker co-op. And Bruce has already mentioned that group, and they can be small or large, worker co-op. And then if the business is owned and controlled by the people that buys and uses the products and services, it's called a consumer co-op. The consumers own that business. And most food co-ops are that way. Food co-ops could be worker-owned or consumer-owned. Housing co-ops are consumer co-ops. Credit unions are consumer co-ops. So those are 2 of the bigger types. And, of course, worker co-ops can be any business you can think of. And then you have purchasing co-ops. And a lot of farmers have used this so that farmers would get together and create a company that would go buy the things that they need so they can produce whatever they're producing, their seed, their fertilizer, their gas, equipment. And that company got better at purchasing, and so they could get and bought in volume, so they could get a better quality, normally for a lower price. So that purchasing co-op, groups of people, and artists are beginning to use those now. Different people are beginning to use that. And there's a group in D.C., Bruce, called CPA, Community Purchasing Alliance, that was working with schools, charter schools, nonprofits, and churches, and buying all kinds of things and get their prices way down. Churches was paying way too much for garbage collection, for example, maybe 7 times more than what they're paying now. And then on the other side of that farm or that artist group is a marketing co-ops, and sometimes they're called producer co-ops. And so groups of farmers would come together and say, okay, we are all producing milk in the farm in Madison, Wisconsin, or in Vermont, or they might not be able to market their products to California or something. So they constrained to where they are. So they formed a marketing co-op. So all of these farmers put their products into this marketing co-op, and then they had expertise of all of the markets, and they would add value to them. Cabot Creamery is an example, Ocean Spray. So these farmers the Cabot Creamery would take this milk and make cheese and cottage cheese and yogurt and all of these different things, adding value. And whenever the marketing co-op or the purchasing co-op made money, the farmers made some money and got dividends that we've already talked about. Wow. Did I get it?
Yes. And right here in Wisconsin, we have Organic Valley, which started out very small and which now allows family farmers to continue to exist by producing organic milk, cheese, and so forth, where these days generally only very, very large dairies can exist in the non-organic milk area. So co-op is definitely helping keep family farmers on their farms.
And in Madison also, you have a consumer health clinic that I had the pleasure of talking with somebody about on the show, that where the patients own the health clinic. So it's a patient-centric clinic, which I like that idea of. So all kinds of different things. All kinds of different businesses. In Pittsburgh, there is a group of artists, African-American, people of color, women own this business, and they make scarf and jewelry and clothing, paintings, and they also buy from other women and put in their store. So any individual artist could not have had a storefront, but collectively they can. And they can sell their wares there. So this co-op really, really works and functions well in a whole lot of different ways.
Yes, and we've actually experienced that just purely on the accounting side, where we've run into people who were running businesses, particularly purchasing groups, who were operating exactly like a co-op, but they didn't know what a co-op was. And so when we came into contact with them, we explained what it was and that they should actually formally be a co-op, and there would be some tax savings for them. And so they were surprised and pleased. But I think that a co-op is a natural business model.
I may have a company to tell you about. I just heard about them last night. I was at dinner with some entrepreneurs, and the guy said that his employees started a company, which he helped them start a company. And then I'll come back and I'll tell you about it after a second break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks, and the program is Everything Cooperative, and we have Mr. Brooke Mayer on the phone. Bruce, I was telling you about, I was with a friend of mine at a dinner. A group of entrepreneurs get together once a month, and we talk about we're all in different businesses. There was 8 of us around the table last night, and we all had similar problems. So this one gentleman was telling the group that his employees, he has a solar, they deal with solar panels and energy. And his employees, he helped them to start another business. And he is giving, and now he gives them business. And I was saying, why didn't they start a co-op? Because it sounds like a co-op. So I was talking about the radio program. That's how we got into that. But I didn't know they would be tax savings if they became a co-op. So there might be a reason for them to do this. So I may want to put you two together if that's okay.
Sure. Yes. In certain situations, co-ops definitely have advantages for taxes and deferral of paying your taxes and so forth. It depends on the particulars of their situation. And I've been running into that more and more because there are many businesses that are converting from being other kinds of businesses to being worker co-ops, where the owner is about to retire or move on or something like that. And it makes sense for the workers to potentially buy that business as opposed to shutting it down or selling it to another individual. And so there are lots of situations where we get a chance to talk to people about what could be the advantages of being a co-op, and there are some. So it's certainly a good business model for people to consider.
So I just left last weekend. I was in Cincinnati at the Cincinnati Union Cooperative Initiative biannual meeting. And that's the first time I really heard about conversions, particularly manufacturing companies. And there's some huge number of small businesses that are owned by baby boomers. And the number in my head is 67%. I don't know if that's right or not, but some huge number of businesses owned by baby boomers, and they call it the silver tsunami, that all of us baby boomers are at the age we want to leave the business, and too often there are no children to leave it to. And only 13% of those had a succession plan. And so a lot of them do what you were talking about. They shut down or they sell to a larger company, and too often that larger company may close that particular branch down. Those employees end up with no work, and that community that business was in don't have that revenue, that tax revenue, and that multiplier effect. And that's why converting it to a co-op is a win-win-win-win. It's a win for the employees, a win for the community, and a win for the person that owns the business, because he can get some long-term revenue off of it potentially. So I like that model a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And many community development agencies and governments have realized that. The state of Colorado has a major initiative going to make available resources to help convert businesses to co-ops, as opposed to other things we mentioned where they may just shut down.
Well, I didn't know about that in Colorado because I try to find out what different communities are doing, and so we can pass it to the other communities. I know New York is doing a lot. Wisconsin, particularly Madison, is doing a lot. Richmond has a community wealth building division. So yeah, that's nice to know about Colorado. So what does Wegner? You said they were doing nonprofits when you came in, and some co-ops. So what does Wegner do now in supporting co-ops?
Well, we have built up a team of people who have expertise in co-ops. Cooperatives are just different enough from other kinds of entities that most CPAs and accountants feel uncomfortable with them or aren't interested in working with them because they have to learn something new, and that's always a challenge and so forth. So we have about 8 people who do a lot of work with co-ops, and so we're working with all kinds of housing and purchasing food and so forth that we've talked a little bit about. So that is a lot of what we do, and we have a website with some resources on our blog that help people, and I'm regularly answering questions for people who aren't our clients, and helping them out here and there, pointing them in the right direction to make sure that the co-ops are getting good, accurate, tax and accounting advice.
And what is your webpage, in case somebody wants to look at it?
It is at WegnerCPAs.com, WegnerCPAS.com. And it's pretty specialized in accounting. There's not a lot of other sorts of things, but there is a co-op page there that has some fairly useful comparatives between different kinds of entities.
So I want to give a shout out to Brian Dalk, who works for Wegner. I met him in San Diego, and he introduced himself, Bruce, as a co-op accountant. Okay, so I assume he's one of those 8 you're talking about.
He is, and Brian came up. He started his career as a bookkeeper in a housing co-op system. So he was running the local student housing group here in Madison as their bookkeeper. And so he was doing that for quite a few years, and then later came to work with us specifically because we were working on co-ops.
Well, as you said that story, I do remember him telling me that. I had forgotten it. But you all have done an audit for one of the properties I manage, and I was excited, and what was the clincher, because, always want somebody close by, and you guys are up in Wisconsin, and how we're going to do this, and a lot we can do technology. But the other thing is that I found out you were managing Greenbelt, and they've been on our program. Greenbelt Homes is 1,600 units. So I figured if you can do the audit for a 1,600 unit, you can definitely do one for a 50 unit, 75 unit, 100 unit co-op. So it was nice to find out you were doing there, and they talk highly about you guys too.
Well, yeah, we really enjoy working with co-ops all over, and it's nice with technology and so on. It's something that 30 years ago was not easy. Today is very easy to work with folks all over, and we're happy to travel as well.
Well, if it's real easy, maybe we can get a discount on the cost of the
we do what we can.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the principles of co-ops, and there's 7 of them. We talked about the member economic participation. Training is very important also. But I want to go to the values, particularly the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. That's the values of the co-op. What's the values of Wegner?
Well, we do have a value statement and so on, and we are not a cooperative, but we certainly talk about putting our employees first as far as making sure that we're valuing them and that we're doing the right thing. When you're a CPA, it's very important to make sure that you're being ethical and giving people good advice. And everybody makes mistakes, and in accounting, you realize that maybe more than other places where you forgot something or you didn't calculate something right. And when you find those mistakes, if they've affected a client, you need to go back to them and say, we made a mistake. Let's make this right. So we feel like that's a very important value.
That's hard to do. At least I have found it hard to do. But we're all human, and therefore nobody's perfect, and we make mistakes. And when you find you made a mistake, to go back to that board and say, here's a mistake we made. This is what it cost you. Here's how we can solve that. Yeah, it's hard to do, but it's a great value to have. I'm glad you do that. And fortunately, we haven't found any mistakes that you've made.
Well, yes, accounting is a place where you do need to be pretty careful about things like that. But as I said, everybody makes mistakes, and you just have to, find a way to make it right.
So going back to value, I like in your statement, you talk about the golden rule. So what is that? How do you do that in your business? Treating people the way you want to be treated?
Well, I think that, although, as I said, we are not a co-op, we do solicit input from our staff regularly, and we have committees of our staff that, give input on things so that we're not making, decisions without everybody having had some ability to take a look at an issue and, give input. One of the things in an accounting firm is that it's easy to grow by going out and finding clients who are maybe less than ideal to work with. And so our staff likes to make sure that we're not just doing that to bring in more revenue, but that we're bringing in clients that make sense for our expertise and also that don't present any problems to work with. There are certainly people out in the world who want to cut corners and cheat the IRS and so forth, and we have to make sure that we're not working with people like that. It's not good for your business.
Well, I wish I had learned that earlier in terms of, you call it intelligent growth. That there's when I took on property management, there are some business I would not take. I always told in proposal, whenever we sat down with the board, if you don't want to do things according to federal law, state law, in this case DC, your bylaws, your whatever you say, your policies and procedures and house rules, if you don't want to do things that way, then please don't hire us. And I would say that. And sometimes what would end up happening was the board that hired you changed, and the new board may not want to do that. So, and then the ones I've gotten in trouble with is normally has been a board change. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think that's extremely important. I would have wished I did. I'm closing my property management business down, Bruce. I don't know if you know that or not. At the end of this year. And I've been doing it for 26 years, and I wish I had known that at the beginning of it. It would have saved some trouble.
Well, it's harder to implement than it is to say, certainly. But it's actually one of the reasons I love working with co-ops, because my experience in co-ops is almost uniformly that everybody is very ethical and wants to get to the right answer and is not wanting to cut corners to save taxes and so forth. They just want everything to be right. And so that's not something that you necessarily find in all small businesses or, even it's not common, but occasionally you run into nonprofits who have that sort of view too. But co-ops have been really great to work with. And I think that people do take those co-op principles seriously. So it's another reason that we like working with co-ops.
That's the ethical value. That's why I said those first for co-ops. And I have found the same thing. I've also found that the ones that cause trouble, and it may be a very small amount, because even like in housing co-ops, HUD had found that there's just so few of the units that they have, the properties that they have funded, ended up in foreclosure or anything like that. Very, very few. And though the ones that do end up in trouble just cause a lot of trouble because they become political animals. They all of the good things that happen, social wealth and financial wealth, and it's usually somebody, and it may be bodies in the co-op that would want to do things incorrectly, and therefore it what HUD people said, and I have found it just takes up a lot of time when you find yourself in that circumstance. We're going to take our last and final break, and this is great talking about accounting and how you can help people and organizations through the numbers. So this is really exciting. We'll be right back to continue this conversation. Bruce, please don't touch that dial. Information is power. Bruce, let's give some more information. Can you tell me what are some of the kinds of things as a auditor when you get into the books where you can really help nonprofits and co-ops?
Sure. I think one of the biggest areas is in looking at the what we call internal controls or checks and balances of an organization, where we take a look at how checks are signed and so forth, and making sure that there's at least two people involved in looking at transactions. We unfortunately still find occasionally frauds and just misunderstandings in co-ops and nonprofits where there are not two people involved in taking a look at things, and so those can be a problem. So we hope to prevent those by paying attention to those areas closely. And since we work with a lot of co-ops in particular niches, things like food co-ops, we have specific knowledge on ways that they can implement those. But any co-op can benefit from just paying attention to those sorts of issues. You can't just rely on trust to make sure that everything will be accurate. You need to have systems in place to do that.
Well, speaking of trust, what I have heard, this is in my training and in my experiences, you put these checks and balances in place to keep honest people honest, because everybody sometimes in their life will have downturns, and somebody will be sick, or there's something happens in the house or something, and they need this cash. And so you want the checks and balances so that they won't be tempted to go and put their little fingers into the tilt and take something out. So that's the checks and balance really, really, really help with that.
Yes, and I think when I started in accounting, I didn't really believe that. I thought, why are we studying this? But through long years of experience, I've seen that, and people often have desperate circumstances in their lives, but they may steal money from their church or, from people that their family members and so forth. And so if there were checks and balances in place, those things wouldn't have happened, and they may have been able to find another solution to their challenges.
Yeah, another solution, or go down the street. don't do it here. Don't do it here.
Right.
Then I've also found, though, Bruce, is that no matter how good the checks and balances, there's some real smart people out here.
Well, there are. And it does happen, that there can be frauds, and that's why you need, to be able to detect things after they happen as well, as try to prevent them before they happen.
So that's one thing is to get these internal controls. What else have you learned or would give advice?
Well, I think that auditing basically can just help people think in a more organized way about their financial situation, to take a look at things like we talked about: how much debt do they have, how much could they afford to have? Could they be using their assets more efficiently by taking on more debt? There are some questions like that. And just making sure that things are reconciled on a regular basis. We often run into co-ops where they are not looking at their financial statements regularly, that they put them off, or they're not holding their bookkeeper accountable to make reports. And so, some businesses need financial information every day or every week. But pretty much every business needs it at least once a month. And we run into folks who don't look at their books at all, except once a year when we come in to do their audit. And so hopefully our audit can help them think more about the financial end of their business. Most people who are interested in co-ops are not interested in the numbers end of it. And so they do need somebody to help them think about that side in an organized way. And so we hope to be able to provide some of that perspective that would help them be more successful at the things they are good at, going out and finding clients for their co-op or whatever it is that they do.
So you mentioned earlier the balance sheet, the income statement, and cash flow. I have found through experience, not in any formal education, that the cash flow, how much money is coming in and how much is going out, that is a better measure for day-to-day management. And so needing that on a weekly basis, monthly basis, and what I used to do religiously was look 3 months back and 3 months forward. To look at, like every day, you can say, here's how much money we're going to need for that property taxes that doesn't come up all the time. It's twice a year, or that insurance payment, and so you can plan the cash. And I have found that to be extremely important. This thing where nobody looks at the reports but once a year, I can't even phantom that. I got you get it. You've seen that. Okay. Okay. And in terms of the balance sheet, cash flow, and income statement from a management standpoint, what have you seen works best? Like I found the cash flow, or what do you advise people is best in using that for management?
Well, I think that a lot of managing does focus on the income statement, and that's certainly very important. If you're growing your sales or revenue number, generally it makes the business easier to operate. And if you're controlling your expenses, again, that typically means that you're able to pay yourselves more, or have more profits to be able to share with the co-op if you're effectively managing your income statement. But again, longer term management does involve looking at your balance sheet and how much debt you have, how much receivables do you have, are you not paying your bills on a regular basis? That sort of thing can help. The cash flow statement is most important when cash is very tight, which many co-ops do operate with very tight cash, and so they need to take a look at the cash coming in, not just the income statement, but are we collecting our receivables on a regular basis? Can we put off paying somebody for another few days or a week if we need to, and so forth? So managing your business, through all of those statements is important from different time frames. The cash flow statement being really the most day-to-day, income statement a little bit longer term, and then balance sheet, yet longer term than that.
Okay. So I noticed on your webpage that you talk about putting people first. And I have it that in the capitalistic model, you say you're not a co-op, but a lot of these values seem like you're a co-op, you operate like it. But a lot of capitalistic model, they're interested in three things: profit, profit, and profit. In a co-op model, they're interested in people first, planet second, and profit third. And you have putting people first. How have you found both you're working, because you're not a co-op, you're more in a capitalistic side of organization or partnership or LLC, and how have you seen those companies that put people first operate compared to those companies that put profit first?
Well, I think that, putting people first, in that case, we're referring to the people who work here. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that they, are valued here, that, we ask for their input, that we're still small enough that, people can walk into talk to whoever they want to if there's something that needs to come up, and that we listen and change things. That we try. Public accounting is a fairly deadline-driven and can be a stressful business, and so we try to make time for people to have parties and people. We'll sponsor an event like Everybody Goes Out Bowling as a fundraiser for a nonprofit, and so we'll pay for everybody to go do that, and make sure that people like where they work. One of the things I've read is that satisfaction with your life and your job can be related to the fact that you know and like people that you work with.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to make it a place where that can happen.
Absolutely. So you pretty much have found that through your reading and your experience, and putting people first has a payoff.
Oh, well, and it does, because then, turnover, public accounting is notorious for people leaving after 2 or 3 years, and we have a much, much lower turnover rate than that. And so it's extremely expensive when somebody leaves and you need to replace them. And so keeping somebody here, rather, and keeping them happy, can be good for them because it's stressful to change jobs, and then it can be good for us because we're not having to retrain somebody every year.
So I know you said you had 8 people in the cooperative side. How many people total work for Wegner?
It's about 130 people. We have a few different offices here in Wisconsin. And so, one of the things that I like about being in a somewhat larger business is because we can share tasks, and if we get a little bit overloaded in our group, we can use other people in the firm to help us catch up, and so we don't tend to get sort of terminally bogged down, which can happen to small consulting sorts of businesses.
Bruce, do you like what you're doing?
I love what I'm doing. I'm 62 now, and retirement becomes inevitable at some point, but I'm trying to put it off as long as I can.
Well, I'm 72, and I'm not looking at retirement. That's a 4-letter word or something.
Use
like
you
that.
as a model.
Okay. Leave message in. What would the message you'd like to leave for people? We got about a minute left.
Sure. I think just that, the accounting side of your co-op is very important, and you should pay attention to it, but that co-ops can help change the world, and I think that more co-ops is a good thing, and so to the extent people can encourage more co-ops, that would be good.
Thank you, buddy. It's a pleasure. Thanks for taking our time being with us, and everybody out there, we'll see you next Thursday, and please live cooperatively.